The camera froze there at the end. So just finishing up on proportional representation. When elections are less expensive, more average people can run, and that will also diversify the candidate pool and often makes us feel more represented, because people who are more like us, whether it's age or background or ethnicity or ideology, are able to run for elections. And as we get more choice and what feels like closer representation in terms of the candidates that emerge in a PR system, it's easier to be engaged. It's easier to be motivated as a voter, and citizen engagement and voter turnout is also likely to increase. So, having said all this great stuff about PR, could we do something like that in the United States? It's hard. At the national level, the Electoral College is a form of winner-take-all elections, and it's part of the Constitution. So unless we can change the Constitution, which is hard, it doesn't happen very often, we can't get rid of the Electoral College. We could take those Electoral College votes that each state has and divide them proportionately. So right now in California, we have 55 Electoral College votes. We have 53 seats in the House and 55 Electoral College votes. So in the last couple of decades, it's always been the Democratic candidate for president who's won the popular vote in California, and that candidate then gets all 55 Electoral College votes. So California could decide to change that and divide those 55 votes more proportionally. So if the Republican candidate won 30% of the popular vote, that candidate could get, 15, 16 Electoral College votes. So that's one way that it would become closer to proportional representation. One of the big obstacles to that is that the parties that currently win under the given rules would have to support a pretty fundamental change that could, in many cases, unseat specific people who win office now. And for example, the Democrats in Congress are not going to give away Electoral College seats to a Republican candidate unless they're getting something in return, unless Texas does it and they can get some seats from Texas, or from Florida, for example, or from Ohio. So it's possible without changing the Constitution to rebalance that a little, but it wouldn't have as dramatic an effect as switching completely to PR would. At the state level, for Congress, states could decide to do away with districts and create multi-member districts or do away with districts altogether, and that would encourage third and fourth parties, fifth parties to emerge. But again, here, it would take the support of the parties currently in office to make that kind of fundamental change, and they're unlikely to do that without overwhelming public pressure, because it could result in them losing elections that they can win under the given system now. So what else, without fundamentally changing the system, could we do to have more impact over our candidate selection and who wins elections? A lot of the action takes place during the primaries. This is when the parties decide which member of the party will be the candidate for Senate or for president or for the House seat and run against the other party in the general election. So this is a great time for you to be involved as an activist, as a donor, as someone registering voters, showing up for debates and voicing your concerns. You can help impact which candidate and influence which candidate from the party emerges as the candidate. There's a reason that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez emerged as the candidate in the primaries to beat a longtime incumbent Democrat, because Democrats in the Bronx, in her district, turned out to support her, and a very different candidate emerged who then went on to win the general election. So the primaries are an important point, but it's also important just generally, even if the candidate that represents your party is not your favorite, to stay engaged, to keep your voice heard by calling a representative or participating in a campaign or writing letters or protesting. So these are some things that we'll come back to when we talk about the section on elections. But the main takeaway from this party section is that the reason our parties function the way they do and kind of dysfunction the way that they do is not an accident. And it's not because we're dysfunctional necessarily as a society, but because the rules that we use to organize and count the votes has a fundamental impact on what kinds of parties we get, how many parties we get, and then as a consequence, as we've discussed, what kind of candidates we get, how engaged we are to vote, the influence of money, and what all of this means for the policies that we get. So the next section is going to look more in detail at some of these dynamics.